Welcome to this video recording. We are installing Alfresco Community Edition with Docker Compose today. And my name is Angel Borroy, working in the Alfresco Search Services team. And let's see what are the contents for today. Alfresco can be installed in some different ways. The first one can be on-premise. So you can use the zip distribution files from Alfresco for every of the different components that participate in the platform. Or you can also use Ansible templates. You have a nice sample from Jeff Potts. There are many others. So the first way is just to use an on-premise installation with your servers, with your configuration, just using this approach. The second one is Docker Compose. Docker Compose is the topic we are covering today and is based on Docker containers. So with that Docker containers, we are avoiding to use that zip distribution files, and we are creating the configuration using the Docker standard mechanisms. And if you are using Alfresco Enterprise, if you want like scaling features, if you want some elastic deployment, then you can choose Kubernetes. That is an orchestrator for containers that is also using that Docker images in the background. Let's start with some topics related with Docker and Docker Compose. We will be reviewing later the Alfresco Docker images. We will make some test with the Alfresco Docker installer, that is a tool provided by Alfresco in order to deploy Alfresco using Docker Compose. We will be talking also about Alfresco add-ons, and finally, we'll be installing Alfresco in Ubuntu using Docker Compose and using that Alfresco Docker installer tool. So let's start with a quick recap on what Docker is. So Docker is a software that you install in your machine, you install in your computer. It works in Windows, in Mac OS, and also in Linux. And it's a client-server application. The server is running a daemon, a program that is named Dockerd. This Dockerd is the one that is dealing with all that Docker operations. And mainly, we are using a command line interface that is named Docker. With this Docker, we can take control over different resources, different objects that are part of the Docker engine. A Docker image is a read-only template with instructions in order to create a container. A container is the runnable instance of that image. So mainly Docker is a process that is able to run processes inside. So it's isolating all your configuration, and it's isolating all your computer configuration because it's able to run an isolated process. So a container is a process that is running a Docker image. Other important thing is data volume, because probably in many applications, like in Alfresco, you need to store some data on your hard disk. So for that, Docker is providing that data volume feature that allows you to use internal volumes managed by Docker or external volumes managed by your local file system. And finally, all these containers are running inside a network. It's a different network from your computer network, and it includes some communication between the different Docker containers that are running inside. So with that, we have that starting figure that is more or less how Docker works. So the first thing you need to do is to build some Docker image. If you are fine with some default Docker image, then you can choose them. So you have Docker images for the main programs that that you can use, like Ubuntu or Nginx or Apache HTTPD or some others. So if you are fine with that, you don't need to build. You can just pull the image from the registry. So this registry is a registry that is storing all the Docker images you want to use. So if you want to add something, some layers to a standard Docker image, then you create a Docker image, customize it, and you build that image, and the image is available in your registry. After that, you can pull that image to your local Docker installation, and you can run this image to create a container, a running container with the different customizations you build. So in Alfresco, we are providing Docker builds with the Alfresco software in order you can pull that Docker images and run your containers in order to run the Alfresco stack. When you want to create an image, you have a special file name that is Docker file. This Docker file is a text file that includes a lot of commands, but mainly the first instruction is a from that is specifying the parent image you want to use. So you are starting from something, for example, from Ubuntu, Docker image, and you are adding your configuration or your software. So you can copy files from your host to the image. You can run some commands inside the container, and you need to specify the default command. So every time a Docker container is started, the Docker container is executing this CMD. So mainly, you have one only process in your Docker container. If you want to share your images, then you have a Docker registry. This Docker registry, the most popular, is that have docker.com. It's a registry of Docker images, and you can upload your images to that registry, or you can pull your images from there in order to create your Docker containers. So a container is not a VM. A container is a process that is run inside your machine. It provides some isolation from your machine, but you can run Docker in Windows, Mac OS, or Linux. In Linux, this is a native feature, but in both Mac OS and Windows, you need some special virtualization software. And with that, with your Docker containers that are running Docker, with your Docker images that are running Docker containers, you can run more than one at a time. So for that, we are using these networking and parse features, and that other software like Docker Compose, Docker Swarm, or Kubernetes that allows you to run different Docker containers in the same machine and in the same network, sharing the same resources. So this is Docker. This is mainly the things you need to know in order to understand what's happening in the scenes. So let's start with the Alfresco Docker images. So the Alfresco Docker images are created, available in Docker Hub. This is the public Docker Hub. So you have an Alfresco organization, and in this Alfresco organization, you have different Docker images. So in this case, we are looking at the Alfresco content repository community Docker image. And inside this, we have different tags. So we have different versions for the software, right? You need to find the one with the GA, generally available tag. These are the final releases, so this is the one we are going to use for this demo. The other are internal releases that are mainly parts of future development and of future releases. But in order to use on a living system, we recommend to use your generally available Docker images. So if we pick this one, we can even see all the different uh, all the different commands that allow us to build that Docker image. But even more, if you want to look at the source code, you can go to this Alfresco GitHub project, and that is ACS Community Packaging, and you can see how we are producing this Docker image. After we build this Docker image, we are publishing this in the Docker Hub, so you are able to pull the image and to start your containers. So this is how this works, mainly for the images, but in Alfresco we have not only one image, but we have many of them for the different components of the system. We are going to see that in detail, but if you see the Alfresco organization, you are going to see like many different applications that we need to run together. So in order to run all the different services together, we are also providing an Docker Compose template. So in this project, Alfresco ACS deployment, we have a Docker Compose folder, and inside we have a sample community Docker Compose. Inside this Docker Compose, we have defined all the different services for the platform. And we are pulling that Docker images from the Docker Hub, right? So we are getting these images, we are making some parameterization, and finally with that, you have a running Alfresco just with one single command. We are going to review the different images we are using for that later, but this is just for you to see that we have a special file that is named Docker Compose. It's in YAML format with this kind of indentation, and you can just define your Alfresco configuration with that and to declare all the services you need to use. This sample have some features that are not provided. So for instance, with this configuration we are providing by default, you cannot use persistent storage. So once you start and you store your system, you are losing all your data. So this is why we create some other project that is named Alfresco Docker Installer. This Alfresco Docker Installer is an application that allows you to create a customized Docker Compose with some features like networking, volumes, and add-ons installation, and so on, that will help you to deploy your Alfresco easily. So this program, it can be run from Mac, Windows, or Linux, and requires Node.js and Yeoman. The first thing also, besides Node.js and Yeoman, is to have Docker installed in your machine. This is Mac OS, so I have this Docker program with some preferences that you need to review. Alfresco is using more or less like 16 gigabytes of RAM. This is something that you need to specify in your resources. This is the same thing for Windows. So in Windows, you are going to have more or less the same icon, and you need to be sure that your memory is upper than 16 gigabytes. In my case, I'm using 20 gigabytes, but this is my development computer, so I'm using different configuration and I need a bit more, right? So just be sure you have this setting before going on. With that, let's start with a simple test in my development machine, just in order to see what's happening when we are using this program. So let's create a folder, and to create a configuration, we just need to run yo docker installer. So if we type, I have already installed or the npm.js, the Yeoman generator, everything is installed in my computer, but don't be afraid of that, because later when we made the installation in Ubuntu, we are going to review all the required software installation. So yes, yo Alfresco Docker installer, And this installer is providing some options to you in order to customize your Alfresco installation. So the ACS version that are supported currently are 6.1 and 6.2. So let's start with 6.2. The RAM, I guess that is better to use like 12 or so, but with 8 it can be run, but better you have some spare RAM. The other thing is that we are providing a web proxy in front of all the different services of Alfresco. And this web proxy is just serving all the requests using the same port. So this is convenient because you don't need just one port per service in order to access your different Alfresco services. Additionally, you can use HTTPS for web proxy, but we are not using that in that case. If you are installing the Alfresco Docker Compose in a computer that is not your development computer, it's not your running computer, then you need to add the name of your server at this point. But this is a development installation, so we are going to hit with the localhost. And the next thing is that you need to decide the external port that is going to be used in order to access the services. So we are going with default, the 80 port, the HTTP default port. So this will be fine. And now we are selecting some other features that are not enabled by default in the product. So you can use Alfresco like an FTP server. Alfresco by default is using PostgreSQL. Only PostgreSQL, MariaDB, and MySQL is supported in the Alfresco Community Edition. By default is Postgres, so we are going with that. And if you are going to deploy this Alfresco to users that are working with different languages, probably you need to enable this feature. Additionally, we can create an internal SMTP server for the email, or you can use some external service if you have one. We are not going with that by default. We can also use some LDAP or Active Directory for authentication and authorization, but we are not going with that again because we don't need one. And finally, we can install some add-ons. An add-on in Alfresco is a plugin that adds some features to the standard product. So we have a list by default, mainly are add-ons provided by the community. So check them before install it, because you don't know if you want to use that or not. But we are going with no add-ons by default. Later, we are going to see how to install any other add-on you may be interested in add to the Alfresco default installation. So we are going with no one. And this question is for Windows users. So if you are installing Alfresco in a Windows machine, in your Windows computer, then probably you need to hit yes for this, because with that, we are using special volumes that are better handled by Windows. But in my case, I'm using Mac, so I can go with default. And we have also some starting script that is providing some additional features that are not required by now. So with that, did you see this program, this Node.js program is creating some files on my folder. So we have the env file, the Docker Compose, some Alfresco files, share files, search file, and some configuration for the engines. So this is a Docker Compose, a running Docker Compose configuration. So let's start this configuration and let's review what's inside. I'm starting the configuration with that. You can see like every container is being started, And you can see like every container is generating some log, right? So you may need to review all these logs in order to see that everything is going fine and everything is working as expected. So if we go to the generated files, these ones, we can see like that Docker Compose, this is the main file we are generating. And this file, let me open that. So this file is including the configuration we are using for this Docker Compose. So inside this file, we find the different services for Alfresco, and we are adding the versions, the tags for the images in this other file, this M file, right? So we have different services. Let's start with the storage that is Postgre. We were using Postgres. So this is the Postgres Docker image. This is an image by default in Docker Hub. We are customizing the memory limit. We are using some environment variables in order to create the Alfresco database. And we are also adding some information for the starting process. Additionally, we are exposing this port. If we are exposing this port, then from my machine, from my local machine, I can access to this service using that port. This is the internal port. This is the external port. And we are using also that volumes. That means that all the data handled by Postgre is stored locally on my computer, right? So you can see all the information from Postgre on your local machine. With that, we have the Postgres database. We have also some ActiveMQ. ActiveMQ is a protocol to deal with topics, with messages, and so on. We are using this in Alfresco, but mainly in the current community version is not used, but is required by the product. So this is the ActiveMQ, another service that is used by Alfresco. And we have the Alfresco service. If you see at this point, this is different. We are not using default Alfresco Docker image. We are building some customization for this. The other is more or less the same. So we have some memory limits. We have some environment variables like the database connection. As you see at this point, the database host is named Postgres because we are inside a Docker network. So this name is the one that is declared at this point. Inside the network, all the servers has the name of the Docker service declared in this YAML file. We have also the configuration for Solar. We are going to see Solar later. Solar is the service that is allowing us to search inside Alfresco. And we have some other variables. We have also the transformers. The transformers in Alfresco are used for transformations. If you have a Word file or a PDF file and you need to perform some transformation on it, then we have additional software like LibreOffice, ImageMagick, PDF renderer that is based in PDFume, and so that are providing these transformations. And we have some other configuration there, and also we have some volumes. So the information for Alfresco is stored in this folder. The content store in the content store deleted. After that, we are again using these standard Docker images from Alfresco for all the different transformers, the PDF renderer, ImageMagick, LibreOffice, Tika, and so on. And we have some UI applications. So we have Ser. Ser is the classic UI application for the users. This is what many users are going to use, and it's a web application that is communicating with Alfresco. So this is why we have that repo host name Alfresco. As we are running inside the Docker network, we can use Alfresco as host. We have also that Solar 6, as we said before. This is the software based in Solar used for provide searching features to the product. And we have also the volumes for Solar at this point. So this is the Solar data that is stored inside. And we have this other application that is also a user application and is more or less the same as SER does, but this one is built with Angular. So it's a different application, it's still growing, but is for the end user. And finally, we are getting all these services together. We are adding a web proxy in front of them. This is based in Nginx, but you can use Apache or any other in order to provide all the different services using the default port. So with that, we check that everything started fine, and we can access to the server with default port. Let's start with the first service that was named Alfresco. This is the repository. As you see, this is only a REST API, mainly a REST API application with some different administration information. We have also the application for the users that is named SER. With this SER application, we can communicate with the repository in order to show the different information for the users and in order to work with the documents. So let's log in with that. We are using our localhost installation from our Docker Compose that has been started in my local machine, as you see. And this is the mainly the application that is going to be used by all the users. You can create documents, upload documents, and so on. And additionally, we have this other application on the slash root that is an end user application, but this one is based in Angular. You see, like the UI is some kind different, but is more or less the same thing. So you can upload documents and so on. So this was a local installation. It works fine for development environments. So you can use that just to test Alfresco features in your Windows machine, in your Mac OS machine. And the next step is to move forward and to install this Docker Compose into a running Linux server. We are going to use for that an Ubuntu server. I have a running Ubuntu machine that is hosted by Amazon, but you can use any other. So in my case, I have a public IP like this one, and it's based in Ubuntu 20, right? But you can choose any other. So, okay, let's stop my local Docker Compose. Okay, and let's get into this this machine, right? This one that is the one in Amazon and is an Ubuntu. So we are now inside this Ubuntu machine, and we are going to install all the dependencies required to create an Alfresco Docker installer. So the first thing we need to do is to install Docker. For that, you can go to the official Docker documentation. Just choose your operating system and follow the steps. So I'm going to follow the steps for Ubuntu. The first one is to install all the required dependencies. Are this one. So nothing is installed because I already did that before in order not to wait for everything to be downloaded. You need to add the Docker registry to your system. You need also to add the repository. Okay, we are now going with that. And finally, you can install the different programs that are required for Docker. So after that, we have Docker installed, Docker 2010, and it's up and ready. The next thing we need to install is Docker Compose. So again, go to the Docker documentation, the official Docker documentation, and choose your operating system in order to install this Docker Compose. So I'm again pasting these instructions. We are downloading that Docker Compose to our user local bin Docker Compose folder, and I'm going to give some permissions for that. So with that, we have Docker and Docker Compose running in our Ubuntu server. Now this is prepared to run this configuration. And now, if we want to use the Alfresco Docker installer project to generate our Docker Compose, then we need to install Node.js. In order to install Node.js, it's pretty simple. In Ubuntu, just install Node.js, install the Node package manager, and after that, you have all the different things you need to do at this documentation, right? And the next thing you need to do is to install Geoman, that is the tool we are using to build the generator. And we need also to install our Alfresco Docker installer. So with that, we are installing Geoman generator. With that, we are installing our Docker installer. Okay, so after that, we have available in the Ubuntu server the same tool we have in my local machine. So with Joe Alfresco Docker installer, then we have the same thing. Okay, in this case, we are installing the same thing, 6.2. We are using 12 gigabytes of RAM. We don't want an SSL HTTP web proxy in front. In this case, the name of the server is different because I'm not installing on my local machine, but I'm installing on a different server. So I need to use this one, right? I can use default HTTP port. I'm fine with that. I don't install FTP. I'm not using MariaDB. I'm not creating all the different services, and I'm not installing any of the add-ons. Or maybe I can install just one, right? Just to see what is different from the previous installation. Okay, we are not using Windows, and we don't want start script. So as you see, we have more or less the same files that have been produced in this folder. And we have an additional files that are these AMP files that are installing the add-ons into the Docker Compose. So everything seems fine. So let's start again with the same command we used before. We may follow the logs. Okay, so in this case, I install this as root, so I need to use the sudo command. Okay, let's do the same thing again. And now we can see that everything is working fine. The images are being downloaded, the Docker images. They are building locally all that Docker images in my Ubuntu server. And after that, all the containers will be fired. In this case, we are going to have a problem because, as I said, in Mac and Windows, Docker is a program that is taking care of the permission of the folders. But in this case, in Ubuntu, as Docker is a native process, then we are going to, we need to make some adjustments on the folder permissions. but this is more or less the same. We are going to create some folders for the data storage. We are going to create some folders for the configuration. And after that, we are going to have all ready as a new Alfresco installation with all the services up and ready in the internet in this case. Okay, so you have also this page on the Alfresco Hub that are the different add-ons provided by mainly by the community. So you can click and see the different description, where to get this this add-on, how to install, and so on. Right? In this case, we are using only one add-on that is provided by default. But if you are using some other add-on, then you can use that modules folder that are present in Alfresco and in share customization, so you can deploy your own add-ons. Remember that there are two different formats. The one is AMP, that is okay. You see at this point, like we have a problem, right? So sorry, if you want to use some different add-ons, just drop that jar files or AMP files in the module folder for Alfresco or for share, so they can be deployed with your Docker Compose template. So in this case, you can see like Postgre is complaining, right? So as Postgre is complaining, it can't write on this folder, then you need to go to the documentation. So you see this configuration, you see the data folder with some repo data, Postgre data, Solar data, and so on. We have also a logs folder with the different logs for every service, but we are having permission problems. So in the documentation of the product of this tool, you can see like how to fix that at this point, right? So mainly, you need to change the permissions for this folder and also for this folder. So let's do that with the Solar data folder. Okay, so let's do that. So with that, we have this specific folder with the permissions that are used by the internal user that is running Solar. Let's do that also with Postgre. Is this one. Okay. And with this, we are creating this folder with the permissions that are expected by Postgre. So let's be sure that everything is fine. Just to be sure, right? And check again the permissions. Set again the permissions to no, okay, I think that I was wrong. So let's remove these folders are created by default on the Docker Compose start. So, and we have no data inside, so no problem with that. But once it's running, this is the folder's data. This is the folder that you need to back up. So let's create this one. Let's apply the right permissions. This one. Okay, and with that, everything should be fine, and we will be able to start this Docker Compose. So let's start again. In this case, I'm using the root user. You can also use Docker with a user different from root, but in this case, yes, we can use that. So everything is starting again. We can see like Postgres is fine now. Alfresco is starting, the different transformers are starting. So let's check that everything is fine. Everything looks to be fine now. And if we go again to the this is another session for the same machine, right? So we have some instructions from Docker. These are all the running containers. So you can see like the proxy, the content application, Alfresco, Ser, TIC, LibreOffice, ImageMagick, Alfresco PDF renderer, Transform, ActiveMQ, and Solar. So everything seems to be running fine. Let's wait for Alfresco to start. Alfresco service is the latest install. Now is creating the database. If you have a database created before, then the database is not created anymore. So with that, you have a running Alfresco with a folder that is containing all the information you need to store. So all the information for your backup is inside this folder, right? So just add this folder to your backups and you should be fine. So let's see, Alfresco started, right? So let's check if that is working fine or not. Yes, using the public IP or hostname. Let's check first the Alfresco application. Okay, we are fine. Is protected by password, admin by default. Okay, we are fine with that. Let's see if we have Ser running. Okay, it looks like it's running fine. There are no errors in the log, so everything seems to be fine. And we are going to create a document in order to see that the storage is persistent. So we are going to create a document and then we are going to shut down Docker and start Docker again. So let's create a plain test file. Okay, so we have one file inside this share files folder, right? And we can see the same using the other UI application that is the one for Angular. So we go to the share folder, then we are going to see exactly the same file, right? So we are fine. And what happens if I stop the Docker Compose at this point and I start this again? That all the different data is available. So we are going to see that this file is inside our share folder. So as you see, this can be a simple installation for your Docker, for your Alfresco stack. Let's start that again. Let's be sure that everything is down and let's start that again. Okay, going up again. And the nice thing about Docker is that you can use all your services from inside a Docker Compose. That is what is provided by this Alfresco Docker installer tool. But you can also use some database in other server. So you have like your Postgre database in other server. You just need to update this with the hostname of your Postgre database and just remove this service at this point and everything should be working fine. In the same way, if you are using your web proxy, your engines, your Apache HTTPD proxy, then you can remove this one and just use your local proxy. In that case, remember that you need to expose all the different ports you need to use for your proxy. So sorry, in this case, for example, you can expose the port for the Alfresco endpoint. Remember, this is the external one, this is the internal one, and with that you are able to connect your web proxy to your Docker services. So we are starting again. In this case, you can see that the database is not created anymore, and if we access again to our Alfresco content application, as we restarted, we need to use our credentials again, and let's go to the share folder, and we have our file. So it's the storage is persistent, and the only thing you need to do is just to take care of this data folder, and probably you want to create a backup of this folder. Probably you can also make a Postgres dump, a PG dump, in order to store your Postgres data. And also probably you want to use some systemctl in order to start Docker Compose when you start your machine. But with that, you have a living Docker Compose running. Very simple. This is something for mainly every community installation. You don't need like more resources for that. So this is enough for you. And I hope that we covered all the different points we have. So remember, we review some Docker and Docker Compose topics. We saw like Alfresco Docker images are created from Alfresco. We reviewed that Alfresco Docker installer tool that is providing some customizations. Probably we didn't see the customizations, but we are going to see that now. So we are extending the Alfresco. We are extending the Alfresco default Docker images in order to, for instance, install modules and add-ons, to install some other external tools, to change the database, and so we are extending that. And we have also a folder with the amps and jars you want to install as add-ons in both Alfresco and share customizations, right? So you can just deploy your amps jar at this point, and they will be available in your installation. So that was all. Just let us know your feedback on this project. We are always happy to add some new feature to the project, and I hope that is helpful for you, and that probably you are starting to use our Alfresco stack using Docker Compose. That was all, and see you in next videos. Bye bye.